Hello everybody, welcome back to the Vintage Workshop. This is Jeff. Just wanted to give you guys an update, and we're going to discuss some of the things that I had mentioned we would get into with regards to needle scaling and Scotch-Brite grinder for cleanup. Cleanup is a extremely necessary job that pretty much nobody enjoys. I sure don't, but it's something that has to be done. It took basically over the course of 4 or 5 days. A lot of work getting all the body castings and everything off, and as you can see now I've started to tape up the machine surfaces. Everything's cleaned up. So I told you guys that I wanted to show you what it was like for paint removal to be using the needle scaler. I think it's a really good option because of the fact that it just doesn't blast debris all over the shop airborne wise, make a big cloud of dust like the angle grinders and wire wheels do. I mean, I still use that stuff for the really hard to get and reach areas because this is a bigger tool, but for probably 98% of paint removal, which is the body filler and the paint and everything, these machines were coated 80, 90 years ago with this black, I call it asphaltium. I don't know if that is exactly what it was, but it's like a black body filler that they used. It's a casting filler, kind of like Bondo. So when you're needle scaling this, you're not only removing the paint, but you're removing all of that too, down to the rough casting. So this does a good job of it. Let me gear up. I'm going to get my safety gear on, respirator mask, headgear, very loud. You'll see that in a second. And eye protection, and then I'll bring you guys back. I'll zoom in here, and I'm going to show you how quickly and nicely it does of getting this paint removed and debris removed, and also how it just pretty much falls almost straight down. So I'll bring you right back. Okay, it's a messy job, but somebody's got to do it. And I guess that falls to the guy doing the work. So at any rate, the entire machine is now needle scaled. I'm still going to do a little bit of extra cleanup. I got to go ahead and take the air grinder to all these machine surfaces, get all those clean. They're gunked up with a lot of rust and dried wood sap and stuff like that over the years. So we'll go ahead and clean up the ways for the table trunnions and all that, and I'll actually show you guys that in a minute. So I really didn't take the time to show you guys the entire disassembly of this machine, and the reason being is I'd never get done. There's just too many parts, but what I am going to do as I clean these parts and get them ready to go back on, you're going to see the whole machine going back together. But what I want to show you here is this upper column here. This is part of the main casting, and there's an upper arm assembly, which is also a real large heavy casting. And it mounts to this, and it slides up and down, and that is basically where the upper bearing assembly and the upper wheel assembly mount to, and then it's got the tilt mechanism for for tracking and stuff like that. How this moves up and down so that you can detension for removing a blade or tensioning it for putting on a new blade is with this threaded rod, and this slides basically down in here. It's got thrust bearings, which you see are falling off, and then this handle mounts right under here, and you turn this handle and there's a D-assembly which is sitting over on the table, but it slides up and down here, and that whole rack assembly mounts to that. So as I spin this around inside this column here, it's all going to be moving up and down. So what I want to do, it was really hard when I was taking this apart to get this column to even move up and down. This thing is all totally rusted and whatnot. So I'm going to go ahead and take the die grinder with the Scotch-Brite pads on them, and I'm going to go ahead and clean these up really good, and then right before we put it all back together, we'll put a really good coating of dry lube on there so that it's a nice slippery surface. And it's an amazing thing what happens when you clean these, how well everything adjusts, nice and smooth, just, you know, real easy, rather than, I mean, I literally was taking 2 hands to this hand wheel and I thought I was going to break something. It was that gunked up and frozen up. So let's go ahead and get to that, but I wanted to show you that just so you had an idea of what I was actually doing right now and not having to wait till the final assembly video in order to understand what's going on with this saw. And I went ahead and I put just a preliminary quick coating of primer on last night before I was all done working for the day. And the reason for that is that gives me an opportunity with these old eyes to see all the little imperfections in the castings. With this particular machine, I am going to be using Rage body filler. A really good product. Sticks really well to the metal, sands really well, spreads really well. So Bondo's basically like 10-15 bucks a can. This stuff's like $50 a can. But it's a much better product. And so anyway, there's a lot of roughness in this original casting. As you guys know, this machine was made in 1936, and back then, while they were great at making castings, I don't think they really spent, and this is just speculation on my part, having taken apart over 40 of these machines, I don't think they spent a whole heck of a lot of time worrying about smoothness with the castings, mainly because they knew they were going to be applying a body filler anyway. So the needle scaling process knocks all that off the machine completely. I swept up half a garbage can full of body filler, was probably on here like 1/8 of an inch thick, and of course that exposes all the rough jaggedness of the casting. And you really, for me, it's hard to see all that without applying some form of a shade for paint. So the primer works good for that, and it's cheap. I basically kind of really can see where I need to apply and what needs the most work. So really the next step now is going to be mixing up body filler and getting it all applied here evenly in small batches, and then go ahead and start shaping it and smoothing it out and sanding it and blocking it down just like you would if you're restoring a car. So I'm going to go ahead and get involved with doing that. I'm not going to do a lot of that on camera. I'll probably show you guys just a little bit of the process, not to teach you or anything, just to show you what I'm doing. This week I was very fortunate to find another tool for the shop. For a long time I have been using just wire wheels attached to the side of a regular bench grinder, the kind that you would sharpen stuff on. And the only issue with that, and it's really only an issue on bigger parts, small stuff like nuts and bolts, it's been working great. But I'm going to go ahead and turn around and show you what I'm talking about here. So this has been my wire wheel setup. It's a Cincinnati pedestal grinder sitting on a rather large pedestal base, and the pedestal is great because of the weight, but you could see how close that wire wheel is to the actual motor housing. Very difficult to get bigger parts in there. So hang on just a second, I'm going to move you over to the other new acquisition for the shop. This week I was able to locate on one of the nearby Craigslists a Baldor 10-inch buffing wheel, and this is exactly the tool that I have needed as you can see, I put a wire wheel on the right side. It's got a big buffing wheel on the left side. And man, oh man, what a difference this has made for getting the larger parts cleaned up and doing it quickly. This is a 3600 RPM motor on this, so that wire wheel is really flying around and does a fantastic job of knocking off rust and whatnot. What I do is I take all my parts, I put them in the parts washer, try to get as much of the grease removed, dissolved and removed off, as well as all the caked on sawdust, etc. of these woodworking parts. But there's still a lot of rust left behind, and the wire wheel makes real fast work of it. I'm going to show you an example so you have an idea of what I'm talking about. This is a perfect example. This is the raising and lowering shaft for the upper wheel assembly of the bandsaw, and here is the pin that looked exactly like it in terms of grease and gunk and rust, and 5 minutes at the wire wheel and you can really see. I haven't even buffed this yet. This is just right off the wire wheel. Really cleans it up fast and just saves a ton of work with sandpaper and all the rest, and really doesn't remove a lot of metal, just knocks off all the nasty stuff. So I get all my parts, my nuts, my bolts cleaned up like this, and then I can decide which ones I want to polish up. If you want, with one of these buffing wheels, you could literally go and by removing all the scratches and using a buffing wheel with like a buffing compound, you could literally turn these parts into like a polished mirror if you want to. I'm not going to do that, but I'm just letting you know that it is possible with the wheel. So just wanted to show you guys that stuff. So I know I've showed you guys this little table setup that I've got sitting up on horses before, but these are all the parts, components, nuts, bolts put away in bags, as well as the upper arm assembly, which is laying on the floor between the horses, the table, the trunnion, as well as the motor mount. I've got the motor over on the other side of the shop because I'm getting ready to take that apart, get the bearings out of it, get that cleaned up and painted, and all put back together, ready to go back in the machine. But basically what I do when I do my restorations is I get down to the main casting, I get all the body work done on the casting, then I'm going to go ahead and do the paint. So of course I'm going to show you guys that process. Once I get the machine painted, then in reverse order of disassembly, I go ahead and I start putting it together. And what I like to do, rather than sitting over at the wire wheel with a big respirator mask on and going full bore for 3-4 hours, which to me is boring as shit, I prefer to go ahead and clean up these parts as I need to put them back on the machine, and that kind of breaks up the monotony of just doing everything all at once. A lot of guys are wired to do the same thing over and over and over for 2 or 3 days straight. I'm not. So we will go ahead and get through all these parts, get them cleaned up and reinstalled on the machine, and that way if I have to make any adjustments or if something is not fitting right or if I've got to machine something, I'm working on it right then and there. I can go over to one of my other machines in the shop and do whatever I got to do and complete the restoration that way. At the end of the restoration, when that table's empty, we know we've done a good job of getting everything back on the machine, and by then the machine will be ready to go back into service for another 75 years. So, that's where we're at. It doesn't look like we made a ton of progress, but let me tell you, I worked my rear end off this week. I probably put 40 hours of work into getting this all cleaned up. There was a ton of rust down below in the motor housing cavity. I think this machine got exposed to some very wet environment at some time. I know it was sitting in a barn for a while. So we got all that cleaned up. I'm getting ready to do a rust inhibitor spray, and then I'm going to be spraying a primer, and then of course the final paint job. But in between the primer and the paint job, we've got to go ahead and get all of this. I will resand all this primer back down, blocking it down, and then I will go ahead and apply the body filler, and then of course repair as I need to, and then once we're ready for paint, we'll bring you guys back. We'll show you this in stages so that you can get an idea of seeing what the process is like. I don't want to sit here and make a fast forward video of 8 hours worth of work condensed down into 10 minutes with me running around with my head cut off at 100 miles an hour on video. So rather than do that, I'm going to bring you back in stages. I will show you some of the techniques I think that are interesting to a restoration project, but along the way you guys will be able to see the transformation of this machine as we move along. So for now, thanks a lot for watching, and if you guys haven't already, please subscribe. There's going to be a lot more videos coming on this particular machine, as well as I'm going to be doing some other little odds and ends type deals. I still want to do a sharpening video for you guys, showing you how to grind bevels, and well, we already did that with the big 3-inch slick, but I want to show you how to transform a used gem in the rough, so to speak, vintage chisel or plane iron, and turning it into a perfectly working usable tool for very short money. So look for that video coming up very soon, and until then, guys, Appreciate your support. Thanks for watching, and we will see you on the next one.